never get tired of that photo. I really don't like that photo of me at all. But here we are. Welcome, everybody, to Office Hours. I am Jeff Blankenburg, your host. And as we do every Tuesday, we're here to answer your questions about Alexa development, whether that's for smart home or skills or whatever else you've got going on. So in the chat, don't ever hesitate to ask us any questions you may have. I have a couple of announcements for you before we get started. The first one is this month's Tech Talk is all about Alexa widgets. If you guys didn't catch it, we announced that Alexa widgets are now GA for devices like this Echo Show here behind me. And if you want to start using them yourself, I would highly recommend starting there. You can reach your users directly on their device's home screen, and it really makes it easy to communicate and understand the information that's inside your skill visually on a card on their device. There's a link at the bottom to check out that Tech Talk. We also have a new skill quality coach. If you guys will recall, for a while we were doing skill quality coach tips, and we were talking about the hows and whys of ways to make your quality improvements in your skill. Well, we have a new video out all about skill quality score, the metric that the skill quality coach uses, and the link was just shared there below. But you can learn all about that stuff at the link that was just shared. Finally, we have some new announcements on Alexa and Matter. These were announced last week. We published a recent blog article that discusses all of these, including the updated Works with Alexa certification requirements for Matter devices, and details on how Eve Systems uses Alexa to reach more customers and accelerate the growth of their business. You can check out that in the link in the chat as well. Next week, we're going to have the certification team on, and I'm also going to be in Seattle. So I'm going to have to find some super secret location to hole up. So we won't have all the craziness behind me, but I will be here and we will find a spot to chat with the certification team. So if you have any questions about certification, maybe issues you've run into, or you need some guidance on making sure that your skill will be certified before you finish it, that's the place to be. So today we're going to talk with our team all about the Alexa Learning Lab. We actually have a new course. I want to make sure I get this course name right. It's Beginner's Guide to Building Alexa Skills. And my guests today are Helen Hasboon and Melissa Kinsey. And so I'm going to bring them on the screen now. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
Certainly. It's so good to have you guys here. So we're going to be talking about the Learning Lab and some of the trainings and workshops and courses that go on there. And I guess I want to get into first, what do the two of you do here? I know that's kind of a joke reference from Office Space, but I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourselves and let us know what your role on the team is. Melissa, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm a tech writer for Alexa Learning Lab. So I essentially wrote the first two courses so far in the learning path that you just mentioned. So we have the Beginner's Guide, which is actually, we call it a learning path. It consists of 4 courses, 2 of which have been written. So that's the part that I do. And I also work on the art for that as well.
Nice. Multi-talented. I love that. How about you, Helen?
She definitely is. I am a product marketer, so I work on the marketing side of things and help strategize around what we're taking to market and why. And this learning course was one of the near and dear to my heart projects that we got to take on as it relates to making sure that developers have the resources that they need.
Cool. Well, I'm glad both of you are here, and I have a whole list of questions that I want to ask you. So, Melissa, I actually want to start with you because one of the things that I get asked quite frequently from developers is, okay, Alexa's been around a while. It's kind of mature. A lot of the ideas have been tried. Why would a beginner want to build a skill? Like, what is the thing that they can get from building a skill today?
Well, yes, there are a lot of skills out there, but there are also some very successful skills that have not yet been built. So I encourage people to think about what their interests are, especially, most people have 1 or 2 super specific interests or sort of quirky things that they, either do or collect or make. And you can always base a skill on something like that. And then also you can personalize it based on your geography or a certain age group or other specifics. So I think definitely there are, as I said, skills that have yet to be written and ones that can be really successful.
No, I think that's really good. And you started to hint at it, and you may have already answered this question, but my next question actually was, How can a developer come up with a good skill idea? What are some of the places that you recommend they look or think about when they're thinking about building something for Alexa?
Yeah, I mean, a skill has to appeal to a wide audience, but it really starts with you. So you have to think about, because it's not going to do you any good to write a skill about something that you don't know much about or you don't have much interest in. So think about what you do, what your hobbies are, what your interests are, what kind of work do you do professionally,
Yeah.
and then try to come up with a skill that relates to one of those things. So that's probably the best way to go about it.
No, I think that's great, and that really translates well to the kinds of things that I've built. Right, the skills that I've had the most success with are the passion projects of mine, whether
Yeah.
that's the standings in Major League Baseball or information about Star Wars characters and the entire world around Star Wars. I also built a whole skill focused on like a big trivia game. I love trivia. Me and my friends go to a Tuesday night trivia every week. And I thought how cool it would be to be able to have a game like that you could just play on your device. So I think you've nailed it. Like, it really has to be something that you personally are passionate about and knowledgeable enough to really make it successful. So that's
Yeah,
good.
for sure.
All right, Helen, I'm gonna flip over to you. I want to get into this Alexa Learning Lab stuff a little bit. So we talked briefly about the this new path that we've created in the courses that are inside. So can you tell me a little bit about what that is and what we launched?
Totally. So as Melissa said, the full learning path isn't launched yet, but the two pieces that we did launch are one, getting to know Alexa skills, and two, skill building basics. So the first course, it's really relevant for someone who maybe doesn't know what a skill is or what they can do, the full scope of their capabilities. So it's a very helpful course to just get familiar with the content, what kind of capabilities Alexa skills can do, common use cases, stuff like that. And then it sets the tone for the skill building basics course, where you're actually getting hands-on with the fundamentals of coding, how the front end and back end work independently, how they work together, and some of the concepts that are going to get pulled in with the coming courses with added functionalities, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. And how would you say that this is different from some of the other beginner coursework that we've created?
I would say that it's different. It's similar, but the difference is really with the Learning Lab as a whole. Instead of, you're scrolling through a web page, going through the tutorial, which is pretty common for what we've done in the past, it's an actual interactive course where you're clicking through content. There's questions, things that actually are engaging you while you're learning, and really tie in those hands-on fundamentals so that it's easier to remember and build those skill sets.
Reinforcement learning, right? It's an opportunity to see and interact. That's good. I know with the APL course that we launched in the Learning Lab, it also allowed you to do some kind of interactive things where you could write some code. I don't believe that that's part of this path. Is that something that we expect in later courses inside this path, or is that something that is only used for kind of more advanced situations?
Oh, it's definitely on the table. I actually might defer to Melissa for that question, but really ultimately what it comes down to is how the course ends up being designed, which it's not yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is the sandbox that's in the Alexa presentation language courses. And I'm not sure that we're going to use a sandbox in this beginner learning path. It's not really necessary, but we do have lots of code. We have code that is copyable so that you can use it later. And I think what's really different, I mean, going back to your question, what's different about this intro content is, as Helen was saying, it is more interactive, it's more hands-on, and there's like a through line that goes through all the courses, starting with the intro course and then moving on to the skill building basics. So the intro course, I just want to be really clear, doesn't have anything hands-on. It's more like housekeeping or nuts and bolts of Alexa for those who have absolute.
I like to think of it as like when you open a box of Legos or an IKEA piece of furniture, right at the beginning, it's like, here's all the parts and pieces you're going to need to be successful going forward, right? It's the same idea.
Exactly. Yeah. But you can skip it if you already know all that. You can move on to the skill building basics and start building. And so we have a sort of we follow a guy called Amar, who is a dog trainer who's building a skill for his business. And so we follow Amar through course 1 and course 2. And then, because skills are never really finished, I mean, you're always building on them, adding new features. And so that's what we wanted to do in this learning path, is like start with a skill, and you can follow along with it and build as we go. So build along with Amar, essentially. And then, and then at the end, you'll have a working skill. And then you can take that knowledge that you have from having created this working skill and apply it to your own skill idea. And I think as you build, you'll get ideas.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I actually had that same experience. I mentioned that I have a Star Wars skill, and I've talked about that on the show plenty of times. But a couple of the folks that are here pretty regularly, they have a podcast, a video podcast that they do once or twice a week, I think. And they decided in one of their most recent episodes to review my skill, like to go through and really take it apart and see what worked. And it's not like I provided them coaching or if there was anything that was given them ahead of time. They just opened the skill and they started talking to it to see what they could get it to do. And this is a story about learning how your customers use your skill and how to make sure you continue to grow. The way it works today is I have the ability to answer, tell you about any character or planet or vehicle or weapon or droid or species or really anything you can imagine in the Star Wars universe. But they said something that I did not expect at all, which was like, give me a planet that is a desert. And I was like, I don't have that. Like, I have Tatooine, the planet, right? And I know that planet is a desert. In my description, it says that it's a desert. But there's no way in the skill for you to ask it that way. It doesn't, that doesn't work at all. And so there were a couple of other things like that they had done that surprised me and just didn't work the way that I had hoped that they would, because they were kind of going outside the box of the way my brain worked. And so I think that's the kind of stuff that you don't even realize until you put it in front of users. Like, oh my gosh, there's all sorts of things that I could be doing. So that's a great idea, Melissa. Good point.
Thanks.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about this course and the courses inside this learning path and how all of this stuff works together. What can developers expect to take away from this? Like, what are the things they can walk away from this and say, now I can do this, or now I understand this concept?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Melissa. So, I mean, the main takeaway that we want is for someone to be able to go through all of this content and then be sufficient on their own to build their own basic skill, essentially from scratch, or using the code samples that are in there. So it's all for you.
That's great. So they should feel like they're pretty comfortable building a basic skill when they walk away from this work. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, they will have a basic working skill. I mean, it's not one that's intended for certification because it's actually a Mars dog training skill,
Right.
But it does work, and it's very cool if you're a beginner to be able to build it and see it work in the Alexa simulator. There's a simulator panel in the developer console that lets you can type in like a question, you can ask it how much are veterinary services or whatever, and then it will tell you once your skill is working, and that's how you know it's working, because it answers you correctly.
Yeah.
So that's really neat. It's very gratifying. I mean, for me especially, like, I'm not a developer, I'm just a writer, so being able to go through this and get it working on my own is just pretty neat.
That is awesome. And that's an important thing to remember. I think a lot of our audience are kind of the deeper, more technical software developer. But there are a lot of people that want to build an Alexa skill, and they are a content creator or a writer or an author or a musician. And they want to be able to put their content on here, but they don't have the budgets that are necessary to hire their own developers. And they don't necessarily have the skills to do it themselves, but maybe they could with something like this.
Oh yeah, no experience is necessary to take this course. Absolutely.
Well, that's great. All right, so now that we're talking about like real beginners, people that maybe have never written code before in their lives, they're a beginner, they've taken our courses. Where can a beginning skill builder go when they run into an issue? Because they don't have the background to like do debugging and solve mistakes that they may have made. What are your recommendations for kind of solving those problems they run into?
Yeah, I'll take that one because I used to work on the developer support team. So that's always going to be what I push first and foremost. Alexa.design/contact us. Memorize it. It's easy. The tab is in the developer console. It's right there on the top right corner, I think, if you're in there. But the team there is super helpful. They're very responsive. We also have the community Slack, which Jeff pushes more.
Man, I wish I could have done that just as you put your hands up. That'd have been great.
I know. Oh. So that's also a really great place to get your support. There's Amazonians in there as well as developers like you who are all pretty engaged and happy to help.
Great.
I think that's super important to get involved in the Alexa developer community because there are, and we're probably talking to them right now, the more experienced developers. And I know that you all want to help the newer developers, and that's great. And we really appreciate that, as the beginning developers do appreciate that as well. But everyone remembers what it was like when they were first starting out, and they're eager to help. So I think it's really great to get connected, maybe even have a couple of go-to people that you can Slack your questions directly to on the Alexa community Slack. Yeah.
All right. Good feedback. I think that's one of the things that I've been most delighted by in our Slack community is that how welcoming and helpful everyone is to someone that is clearly asking beginner questions. It's easy to dismiss them or say, go read a book first and then come back here, or stop asking us questions that are easy Google searches, right? Like they don't do that. They take the time and the care to say, oh, it sounds like you're trying to do this. Here's what I would recommend next, or here's an article I found that will help you solve your problem. It's fantastic. Very, very inclusive, which is an important part of being part of a community. So I think that's great.
Yes, I think skill building is a really exciting thing once you're starting to actually be able to turn your ideas into a tangible product, and it's a natural instinct to want to share that as soon as you're doing that fluidly.
Yep. And as Melissa said earlier, like there's something magical about the first time that you go into the simulator and you type a command and Alexa responds the way that you wrote it. Like the words you wrote are coming. Oh my gosh, that's magical the first time that happens. I used to use a term when we would do lots of workshops and things where we had 100 developers in a room, and we optimized all of our work, all of our training, all of the information around the idea of mean time to voice. How fast can we get our audience that's sitting here in front of us to be able to hear words they wrote? That is the most important task we can get them to. And then once they've done that, okay, now we'll add and we'll grow and whatever. But that magic, Melissa, as you described, that is the hook. That's when like people are like, actually, this is pretty cool. I need to go further. So something that we've always been very, very focused on. And I'm glad to hear that the rest of the team kind of feels the same way. It's a neat feeling.
Yeah. And I mentioned you can test in the Alexa simulator, but you can also test with your voice just as you would with a real Alexa.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff, I know that you created a video on that because I did include that clip on that page. So it shows you how to test with your voice. I find it's better to test with the simulator first to make sure that Alexa understands you and that it's working. And then once you know it's working in the simulator, then you can go ahead and test with your voice and make sure that you get the same result, because that's what your users are going to expect, is to have a consistent product that responds in a consistent way. When you say the same thing to it, it should respond the same way each time.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's one of the things that developers are, but at least advanced developers are really quite good at, is reducing complexity. When something isn't working, I want to find the most streamlined path between the 2 points that there might be a problem so I can solve it. And what you're describing is, I just want to type to my service right now to make sure that I'm giving it exactly the right words to do the thing that I want it to do. And I'm testing that moment. Testing with your voice adds all of this, right? And so I want to make sure that, like, at least initially, I'm just focused on this, and then I'll add the voice stuff later and let that flow through also. But yes, very, very good advice. So I know you said you have the 2 courses that are in there so far. Let's say a developer or a content creator or someone that is interested in building for Alexa starts there and they get through the 2 courses. What do they do next? What's the recommended next step? Is there something that the course tells them, like, hey, you just finished this, now go do something new?
Do you want to take that, Helen, or?
I'm happy to, but I think it's your turn.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we do have another learning path that's already out there, and it was finished first, so it's a little more mature and has, I would say, probably more content at this point, and that is on building, I think it's called building responsive, visually responsive skills. That's
nice.
Pretty close. And it focuses on, once you have an Alexa skill that works on a device without a screen, you'll want to then start adding visual elements like buttons and widgets. A widget is like to give a simple example, it would be the weather icon that comes up and tells you it's 93 degrees out or whatever it is. And so it shows you how to start adding those things. So that would be a course that you could move on to. There also, if that's a little bit more advanced than what you're looking for, you can move on to looking at the tech docs. We have other intro content. Or, as I mentioned a couple of times already, go ahead and just start getting connected with other people and then start iterating on your skill.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think playing with the concepts that you're learning helps a lot down the road, even if you're not building like a skill idea that you think you're going to actually publish or maintain in the future. Or like maybe you just build a skill to play a prank on someone. Like somebody that I talked to at an event once told me about a skill that they used to have go off to wake their son up, and it would just rickroll him to get him out of bed, like that kind of stuff. It just have fun with it. But yeah, as Melissa's saying, there's lots of other learning content as well.
Yeah, and once you finish the beginner path, you'll, as I mentioned, you'll have the finished skill, but it's not your skill yet. It's Amar's skill. Again, that's the dog trainer whose journey we sort of follow along with as we build a skill, just as an example. And so you'll have this finished working skill, but at that point, you'll have started having ideas about what you'd like to build, or maybe you even went in with an idea. And then by the end of the learning path, you'll now have the skills, and you can go ahead and almost start over at the beginning, only this time build your own skill.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people don't always appreciate, is that by building a thing that you know is going to be a throwaway, as you go through that process, you realize, like, oh wait, if that works like this for dogs, I could see how that translates really well to like ingredients for a recipe or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Something that you're passionate about, which goes back to the things that we were talking about earlier. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, I'm actually curious for you, because I know this is a little bit different than some of the work that you've done on our tech docs. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how did you find writing the content for the Learning Lab differed from writing like the tech doc content that we see all over the place?
It is different. It's more focus on the how instead of the what. So it's more hands-on, more instructional, rather than just describing systems and how things work. It's also a little bit more animated, maybe. I like to think of the tone as being more like someone who knows a little bit more about it sitting next to you and sort of taking you through it and showing you how to do things. Whereas with the tech docs, it's a little bit more detached and formal. And that's fine. That's what tech docs are supposed to do. They're not really supposed to have personality.
Right. No, it's interesting that you use that analogy, because that's something that I've stuck with for quite a while, is that there's three of those big W's. They're not all W's, but that live in our world. You have the what, that's very much the tech docs, right? It's a broad document that specifies what all the things are and how you can use them. Not even how you can use them, just what they are. This kind of content, I think, very much addresses the how. How do I do this? How do I solve this problem? How do I do this thing? And then the why kind of lives on in a lot of the work that I do and that Helen does, which is the inspiration, the motivational stories, the why should I build an Alexa skill, right? Those often fall into, I guess, classification of marketing, but it's much more about like how do we convince you that like this is worth your time, this is worthwhile. And I think that's where the why lands in a lot of it. So I think that's a good designation for how these different bits of content are doing. All right, we seem to have a good bit of discussion happening here in the chat. So I'm going to jump into that here just a little bit. We have our first three. I think they race to see who can have the first comment. But Gavin Watson and Brian Tarbox and Habuma One are all here, and welcome to all of you. I always like to say hello and make sure people in the audience, if you have questions or just want to say hi, please drop some stuff in the chat. We would love to chat with you. So we were talking earlier about building skills that follow your passions, right? Things that you're interested in, or that you have a lot of potentially a knowledge about. And Brian Tarbox asked the question: how do you balance skills that you love with skills that might be monetizable? And it's a really valid question. I don't know that there's a straightforward answer, but I'd love your either of you, if you have thoughts on that. I think it's an interesting question to ask.
How do you balance skills that you love with?
Like I could build something that I'm really interested in, but that might not really have a lot of ways to be monetized, to make money, right? In order for me to build something, generally I want to see some return for that, unless it's only serving my purposes. So how do you find that cross section between things I'm interested in and things that make money?
I think, as I said, you start out with what you're interested in, which is great, but then you figure out how you can generalize that. Like, for example, let's say you're interested in like goat yoga or something. That's like pretty specific and a little bit weird. So maybe you figure, well, okay, maybe I could generalize this to be a skill about yoga in general, not just goat yoga.
Sure.
So that's what I would do is look for a way that you can take something about that skill, the passion part that you're interested in, and connect it to something that you think a wider audience of people would be interested in doing.
Yeah, I can give a couple of examples of that. So with the trivia game that I built, the idea initially was like, I just wanted to have a cool, fun trivia game that had hundreds and thousands of questions across lots and lots of categories. And then as I looked at it, I said, well, okay, I've got to find a way to make some money come out of this somehow. And so I started selling content packs, right? So instead of just loading this thing with thousands and thousands of questions initially, I had 20 questions in each category, and that was the free experience. But if you wanted to unlock like all of the science questions or all of the music questions or whatever, you could do that by just saying, hey, I want to buy that category. And they were very inexpensive. I think it was $1 or $2. And then I thought, but man, that could really add up if they really, like, let's say they want the broad swath of content. How do I give that to them? And so then I introduced a subscription that was, I think it was $5 a month, and it unlocked all the categories for as long as you had your subscription, right? So you start to look at it and say, I'm not necessarily recommending that you like hold things back, but you should think about like, what is a good core experience, and then how can I expand that with additional things that I could potentially make money from my bigger fans.
Yeah. And you can also just ask, this is how I always think about monetization, what would I pay for in an app? Like, I'm a very hard customer to get to pay money in an app. I don't think I have ever paid for anything in an app like on my phone, other than one time I bought like a pack of crosswords because ads are really irritating.
Right.
So if you think about it that way, and you're talking about like skills and things, what are the kinds of perks that you can offer people or add-ons that you personally would be interested in paying for? Like to goat yoga, maybe it's that there's like a beginner, intermediate, or advanced set of courses, and they have to pay for the intermediate or whatever.
Yeah, agreed. I think that especially as I think about monetization, when I think about mobile apps, and I have paid many apps the $2 or whatever they were asking for. My rule of thumb generally is if it can hold my attention for more than an hour, that developer earned my $2. And more often than not, the thing that they're asking me to pay for is to remove the ads, like you described. Most apps are free, and then they have some annoying thing in the way, like advertisements. And if you can hold my attention for an hour, you earn my money. As a developer, I appreciate how much time and effort went into making something that will hold my attention for an hour, because almost nothing does. And so that's generally a really good sign. So yeah, I think that's
so what we're learning is make your skills free and super annoying, and then make the premium version a little less annoying so that people pay.
Or slightly less annoying. No, please don't take that advice. Don't make your skill annoying. Because you want people to come back and you want people to continue to use it. But
yes,
I think that you can find ways to make it so that like they're just wishing for a little bit more. And I think that works really, really well. Also, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. It seems like a couple of the folks in the chat have had some issues with the video feed being very blurry. That's a you problem? No, the thing that I want to say is that it sounds like some people's settings have been set to a much lower resolution. And so I don't actually know what platform you're on or how you check that, but Dana Voice mentioned that his settings were at 160p. We're broadcasting at 1080p, so that's about 10% quality, which is not very good. So if you're seeing it grainy, check your settings in your video player on whatever platform you happen to be on and see what the resolution is set to. If you can set it to default, please do. That's 1080p. That's what we're broadcasting out as. But yeah, if you're finding issues with your video, that's probably the case. So behind the scenes, all of you should know at this point that we have our developer advocacy group hiding behind the scenes, looking at issues, paying attention to what's being said and where. But there was a question that came up, and I wanted to make sure, Melissa, you were aware of this especially. I reached out, I think probably about a month ago at this point, and mentioned that on the Tech Docs pages, there's a feedback button.
Yeah.
That does not work. And I didn't know if you were aware of that, but it does not actually launch the feedback form and let you do what you would do to provide feedback. And so Dana Voice mentioned that and says, hey, it still doesn't work. Is there any information on why? Now, DAG has said behind the scenes that they're already on it and they've got a ticket and they're rolling with it. But I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, I actually was not aware of that. So thank you. Good. And I'll check into that. But I do know that they are evolving that feature, the feedback feature. It's changing a little bit. Ooh. And so I don't know how much I can say about that publicly, but it's possible that that's why it's not working, because it's being worked on.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I think that's plenty for now. We don't want to scoop the big news.
No.
So we'll wait to see what those changes are. We can talk about them on a future broadcast. We were also talking about how magical it is the first time you hear Alexa say your words. And so Malero said, I've been making Alexa skills for 4 or 5 years now, and it's still magical. That's awesome. Mahler Sachs also said it's magic. Absolutely. So I think we've hit a note there for sure.
4 or 5 years. That is so impressive. Is that pre-display days?
5 years would be before for sure. Yeah, that's 2018. Yeah, APL was late 2018.
Oh man, what a cool experience to go from the pre-visuals to post-visuals.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's one of the other things that I've been talking with our internal teams about, is that there have been so many advancements and so many things that if you were a developer in 2016, 2017, like you were pretty limited. 2016, like we didn't even have an SDK. You were doing it all kind of on your own. And so to be able to grow up through all of that, I think newer developers that have come to Alexa in the last year or two, or even really since COVID, it's amazing to me how much they're like, wait, you can do that? Because there wasn't an announcement. There hasn't been something to let them know, like, hey, there's this thing that's possible. I did a I did a video a little while ago just talking about our tools. It was last month's Tech Talks. And I talked about how you can do local debugging. And I got a bunch of people that reached out to me and said, I had no idea this was possible. You just saved me hundreds of hours a week. I don't know, maybe that's hyperbole, hundreds of hours a week, but it was a lot of hours. And
hundreds a week, huh?
Right.
If you have hundreds of skills.
Right. I mean, I don't think they're working hundreds of hours a week, but maybe. So that kind of thing surprises me because I'm like, how do you not know that locally? But I kind of came up as it was announced and it just added it to my toolkit. So really, really good. So speaking of new things, though, we announced the radio skills kit a little while ago, a couple of months ago, I think. And Wolf wanted to know if we have any training available for how to use that. Are you guys aware of any resources that they can use for the radio skills kit outside of the Tech Docs maybe and the blog?
Yeah. So we dropped the Tech Talk in the chat already, which is a great resource to learn more. But we also have a landing page. So let me just pull that up. And you can go here. Oh, this is not a pretty URL. Hold on, let me see.
For those who don't know, the radio skills kit thing is basically like a no code option that allows stations to work with Alexa. Yeah.
Basically get your radio station on Alexa devices, which is that's one of the core use cases that we see across Alexa is people listening to music, whether that's their favorite radio stations or just music from the streaming service. But if you've got a radio station, it's worth your while to be there for sure.
Yeah, okay. Free and no code. Just submit the info.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, you already have to just point. But definitely possible. Helen, I want to let you know, Gavin Watson also pointed out that you are competing with me. You might have as many plants as I do pops. So
this is just one corner of my house. But yeah, I mean, I know this is developer office hours, but if anyone has a plant question, you can ask me that too.
That's perfect.
Bring your sick plants to office hours and put pictures. Anyway,
I have a hat.
Right. Yeah, you've got a beautiful hat collection back there.
Thank you. That's not even all of them. I just haven't hung up all of them.
I say the same thing. Like people are like, Jeff, that is too many. And I'm like, you're maybe seeing a third of the ones that are in this room.
Oh my gosh.
It's a problem. But this is like a super hidden room that is only used for work and streaming and whatever. So I've turned it into some nonsense. I mean, there's a full-size Captain America shield on the wall in this room. So like, yeah, it's a little nerd haven.
Jeff, have you created a toy skill?
Well, I haven't. So one of the things that I considered doing was building a skill for collectors. So that if you collect something, you could go in and add a bunch of data about all the things that you have. And then you could ask it like, hey, do I have that Darth Vader one? Or do I have like, I think maybe everybody's old enough to know who this is. Helen, do you know who that is? I
didn't have very much TV when I was a kid.
This is a commercial character, not a TV character. This is Noid. He was a character in Domino's pizza commercials in like the 80s and early 90s. But like, if you don't like, I mean, I have a lot of these here, so I don't always remember whether or not I have one when I see it like in a store or on a shelf. And so I thought it would be kind of cool to be like, do I have the Noid? And just have it tell me like, oh yeah, you've already got that one. Or whatever. There's also price guides. You can look all these things up and see what they're worth if you're interested in that kind of stuff too. But I just never got around to building the collecting one because it's so broad to think about being able to collect almost anything. And then how do you fit all those pieces together? But it would be cool. So if somebody wants to build it, please do. I would use it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you could tap into a pricing API and that would be cool.
So Prisoner 4044 said, and this relates to what we were just describing, he thinks if you're interested in it, other people probably are interested in that thing as well. And so there's always a chance to make money. Maybe not a ton, but there's definitely always a chance to make some money from a skill.
That's a good point.
And Brian Tarbach says, money from a skill requires either a freemium mode where, like we described, something is free, but then there's more content, or some other sort of in-skill purchasing. And he's right on that. I mean, it's rather tricky to think about the mechanisms that are available to you. Amazon Pay was a really good solution for selling things outside of a skill. But with that being deprecated, really you're limited to ISP style interactions today. The other thing that you can look at though is the Alexa shopping kit. And the reason that I recommend that is because if you have products, physical goods and services, and you want to sell them through your skill, you could do that. You just have to have them listed on Amazon.com someplace. But if you are a seller on Amazon.com, it's very easy to sell your products in an Alexa skill using the shopping kit. So that's another consideration. But there's a few hurdles there you have to get through before you can actually sell things for sure. Prisoner 444 also wanted to know, does Amazon allow sponsored content yet? I can't remember. So when he talks about sponsored content, I think he's referring to like advertisements. Can I sell ads or sponsored content inside my skill where someone paid for placement, basically? I don't believe so. I don't believe that in the current state of things that is allowed. There are exceptions to that, certainly for things like flash briefings and podcast skills, but those are for somewhat obvious reasons. Those types of content are generally pre-recorded and they already had the advertisements built into them. And so it would be very, very hard and a lot of extra work to remove those things. But in general, if you're building something inside your Alexa skill that is specifically an advertisement, that stuff would not be possible today. Brian Tarbox says, we need more subscription options, and I've added this to User Voice. I love that. This is a good opportunity to talk about User Voice if I can find it quickly. User Voice is somewhere in here, maybe. Why can't I ever find the one I want fast? User Voice, User Voice. There it is. Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar, User Voice is a place that you can go and ask for features. Now, I don't want to make any promises. It's not like if you go fill this form out that like next week we're going to deliver the thing that you want. But this is a tool that our product team uses to refine their backlog, to make sure that as they're thinking about and planning forward what they're going to be working on, this is one of the inputs that they use to determine what's next. What should we do next? So if you haven't used User Voice, I highly recommend it. But thank you, Brian, for calling that out. And now let me get back to
just a quick plug on User Voice. It's really helpful when you do submit things on User Voice, because then people like me can be like, here's the User Voice request. See?
Right. Look, it has 74 votes. Like clearly people are interested in this, right? That's good. But more subscription options. And I think what Brian is referring to is that today I think you can only do a monthly and a yearly subscription. I think there are people that would be very interested in a weekly or potentially even a daily subscription. And those things aren't possible today. And one of the other things that I ran into that was kind of tricky is that I wanted to, as I mentioned with that trivia game, you can either buy an individual content pack or you can buy the subscription. But there's some limitations on how I can use those subscriptions. One of the other things that's not very easy to do with subscriptions is increment consumables. So what if I had a subscription in a game that gave me 1,000 tokens every month that I could just use? Think about like Audible, where they just give you a credit every month. Those kinds of more advanced scenarios aren't really possible with the mechanisms we have today. And those would have to be newly introduced and managed by Amazon. That's not something a developer themselves could do. Here's another good one. Brian would love to see the ability for users, like end users of a skill, be able to give feedback to that particular skill with their voice. I know this is something that's been talked about. It's probably even on User Voice. But the ability to leave a review and to leave feedback to a developer about like, hey, I ran into this issue, or I really love this skill. I'm not sure if he's talking specifically about feedback that would go in the store, like 5-star review kind of stuff, or if he's just looking for a way to communicate with developers directly. But I think those are both important mechanisms. Brian also says he's been writing skills for 7 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But
lucky number 7. What's the lucky skill going to be that comes out to celebrate 7-year anniversary?
I'll be interested to know what he's working on. Brian's always got something cooking, but his most successful skill, I think, has been a soccer skill that he built. It's really kind of got an immersive feel to it. You hear crowd noises and like it has you can look up all the stats on your favorite team and things like that. It's quite good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he said in the chat that he has a simple way in his skill for users to give feedback. I think that would be an excellent Slack conversation to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say in terms of the feedback that at Alexa Learning Lab, I mean, we read everything. We have a weekly meeting where we go over every comment that was in the surveys that are in the courses. We really take that feedback to heart, and we really appreciate that people take the time to leave it for us. So thank you to everyone who has done that. And we encourage you to give us that feedback because we use it very directly to change the courses and shape future courses.
I think it's sometimes hard as an external third-party developer, content creator. You look at Amazon and you just see this massive company that has so many people. And I think it's easy to just say, like, my feedback doesn't matter. Or nobody's going to read this, or nobody's going to listen to it. I will tell you that my experience, and again, I've been on the Alexa team for almost 7 years. And in that time, what I found is that this is a very small business. Yes, we have the funding and the support of a very large company, but the Alexa team is really quite small. I mean, I would say we're less than 100 people. Never mind like the product development side. I'm just talking about like the people that are creating all the content and managing all of the support and all that stuff. It's probably 100 people. I think that's reasonable to think about. And so when you think about all the feedback channels that we have, we would welcome much more feedback. So don't ever feel like your voice doesn't matter or that you don't have something new to say. We want to hear from you, and we definitely value the feedback that we get, because we can only get better and support you better when we hear from you directly. So please, I know it seems like it's this behemoth of a thing, but your feedback is heard and listened to for sure.
Yeah, and when one person speaks up about something, then I always think, well, if that person spoke up, that probably represents 100 people who thought the same thing but didn't speak up. So very important.
Agreed. Mahler Sack said, we already used the radio skills kit and it's great. It's easy and it's fast. So that's great to hear. Malero says a collection skill would be super fun. He'd like a Magic the Gathering collection skill so we could keep track of all of the cards he has. Soundmaster AJ knew that was the Noid. So welcome to your back, my friend. That's how it works here. So Prisoner 4044 was talking about advertising as a way to make money for skills, another revenue stream. Obviously, we see on the web and in most software anymore that ads kind of drive a lot of the revenue that people can make from their software. And so I think people are looking for an opportunity to make that happen. O'Brien mentioned that he'd like to be able to define what a subscription is. So for him, with his Premier League skill, right, he's got a soccer season. The football season runs, I don't remember the time, but it's like January to October. And so if you think about having a subscription, I would want it to be January to October. And you could probably just say it's January to January, but it's nice to be able to recognize that a season runs a specific amount of time. That gets harder when you think about things like American football or basketball that jump over, they cross a year. So now you have to think about, how does my subscription work? It's not really an annual thing. It's something different. And I wish I could just say that there's a 6-month subscription for this or something like that. This is already on user voice as well, but Gavin Watson said, the ability to respond to reviews left for skills. So once someone leaves a review on your skill, and mind you, they left a review on your skill, but that doesn't mean they used your skill. They could just think they did. They can leave feedback and say, hey, this was terrible, or this was a 1-star experience, or whatever. There's no way for a developer to respond to that and say, oh, well, I'm sorry you heard, we fixed this issue, or we've addressed this problem. So it stacks up as negative feedback on their account, when realistically it was, in many cases, a misunderstanding. Well, we have made it through our list of questions in the chat so far. There's lots of good discussion points here, though. As we start to wrap things up, we only have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything that we can tip our hand to a little bit as we think about the future courses that are going to be part of this learning path, or other things that we may see on ALL that we can share? I don't want us to overshare, but if there's anything that you have that you want to discuss, I'd be happy to chat about that too.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about monetization, and the next skill in this path is going to be on that topic. It's going to be earn money with your Alexa skill, I think is the title. So,
well, I assume we're going to address all of the possible avenues that they can use for revenue. That's great. Like that'll
yeah.
shop kit and ISP
and skill deals and
nice.
Everything.
Nice. That's exciting.
Yep. And then after that, we are probably going to do a certification course. Nothing set in stone. Sure. Excuse me. Nothing set in stone yet, though.
Yeah, the further away the roadmap gets, the blurrier
right. It is. Exactly.
Yeah, but that said, I mean, if there is content that you want, let us know. Totally. It doesn't have to be something that we've talked about here. Just if there's something that you think we're lacking educational content wise, definitely let us know.
Yeah. There was one more question Dana Voice asked about the skill that I've been working on over time and when that's going to be certified or usable. So we had to put a little bit of brakes on that. We've got some things that we want to continue to include but aren't available yet. And so we're kind of holding it back a little bit before we can launch this thing into the real world. But hopefully that'll be coming along sooner than later. Mahler Sachs also said, related to metrics, we would love info like device type and time of day on the intents. For the two of you, I don't know how much time you've spent in the metrics dashboard that Alexa skills have, but there's a lot of good information there. But there are some things that are glaringly missing, like which device someone was using. And so this is just excellent feedback. I'm assuming, Mahler Sachs, you've probably put this in user voice already. If you haven't, I can't imagine someone else hasn't also. But there is a richer, more robust set of data, especially when it comes to devices. One of the things that developers really want to know is what percentage of my users are using screens? And if they are using screens, are they using all the different kinds, or are they all on an Echo Show 8, or are they all on the 15? Or, it makes it easier for them to understand how to focus their work. Because if you today want to support every possible user with the best case scenario on their device, you're spending an infinite amount of time trying to craft like the right APL for every screen size, for every screen type. It's a lot of extra work. So being able to refine or at least focus their efforts based on those analytics would go a long way. I think that's great feedback.
Yeah. I mean, there's always an opportunity cost, so you have to decide what you where you want to focus your effort, because if you focus it in one place, you're not focusing it in another. So.
And today, if they want to know what kind of devices people are using, they have to write their own analytics tracking inside their skill, because the code that they get to tell them what their skill should do contains the dimensions of their screen. But our analytics dashboard doesn't show that stuff. So they have to capture every time, like, oh, another user using this size screen. It's a little extra work it feels like we could make it easier for them. Wolf wants to know if there is, he said APLT training. I don't know if you guys are even familiar with APLT. Maybe you are. APLT is, do I have one here? I don't even think I have one. I have one over there. But anyway, we make an Echo Dot that has a clock on the front of it, like through the fabric. And that screen you can write code to put things on that display. And that is APLT. So Wolf, I'm not aware of any specific training other than the stuff that you'll find in the Tech Talks. But honestly, it's not a very complex process. You just create a little dialogue and pass in the text that you want to use. But there's a very specific alphabet. I think there's only 20 of the letters supported, and some of them can only be lowercase and some of them can only be capital because of the way the display works. And Dana wants to know if I heard anything about other than 7-segment output. 7-segment is where that clock comes from. If you think about like an old digital clock that has the top, bottom, left, right, and then some diagonals to cover some letters, that's the 7 segments. And he's asking if there's anything else, because the newest Echo Dot with clock actually went to a block style display, but it still only supports the same alphabet. We haven't expanded that with the technology behind it. So no, Dana, I haven't heard anything else yet. I apologize. The moment I do, though, I will sing it from the mountaintops, because I think that's a cool opportunity for that specific device. All right. Well, I think in lieu of having more questions or having, I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk to you guys about. I think we can probably call it a day. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're here every Tuesday to answer your questions about Alexa and everything related. So please come find us on whatever social network you're on. We're broadcasting on Twitter and Twitch and YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. So Wherever you can find us, please join us and chat with us while we're there. Next week, as I mentioned, we're going to have a certification team. I am going to be in Seattle, so we'll have at least a new bit of scenery behind me, and I'm looking forward to all that. So I've got to fly there on Sunday. Actually, we've got a lot of work between now and then. But Melissa, Helen, thank you guys so much for being here.
Sure,
Thanks for having us.
Certainly. And with that, I'll say goodbye to all of you, and we'll catch you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.